The snow whispered beneath your boots as you stepped carefully through the forest, each breath drawing in the cold, pine-scented air. Above, the moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow across the clearing where an old fire pit waited, ringed with stones darkened by time. You paused at its edge, fingers brushing the worn bark of a nearby log, before settling down and wrapping your coat tighter around your shoulders. A gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of smoke, memory, and something just out of reach, familiar but long forgotten. In that moment, the silence spoke to you more deeply than words ever could, and you knew the story was just beginning to unfold. As your breath slowed and your thoughts began to settle, the wind seemed to circle around you like an old friend returning from a long journey. You watched the fire flicker, casting golden light onto the snow-covered ground, and felt something deep inside begin to loosen and drift free. The snow whispered beneath your boots as you stepped carefully through the forest, each breath drawing in the cold, pine-scented air. Above, the moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow across the clearing where an old fire pit waited, ringed with stones darkened by time. You paused at its edge, fingers brushing the worn bark of a nearby log, before settling down and wrapping your coat tighter around your shoulders. The gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of smoke, memory, and something just out of reach, familiar but long forgotten. In that moment, the silence spoke to you more deeply than words ever could, and you knew the story was just beginning to unfold. As your breath slowed and your thoughts began to settle, the wind seemed to circle around you like an old friend returning from a long journey. You watched the fire flicker, casting golden light onto the snow-covered ground, and felt something deep inside begin to loosen and drift free. The snow whispered beneath your boots as you stepped carefully through the forest, each breath drawing in the cold, pine-scented air. Above, the moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow across the clearing where an old fire pit waited, ringed with stones darkened by time. You paused at its edge, fingers brushing the worn bark of a nearby log, before settling down and wrapping your coat tighter around your shoulders. A gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of smoke, memory, and something just out of reach, familiar but long forgotten. In that moment, the silence spoke to you more deeply than words ever could, and you knew the story was just beginning to unfold. As your breath slowed and your thoughts began to settle, the wind seemed to circle around you like an old friend returning from a long journey. You watched the fire flicker, casting golden light onto the snow-covered ground, and felt something deep inside begin to loosen and drift free. The snow whispered beneath your boots as you stepped carefully through the forest, each breath drawing in the cold, pine-scented air. Above, the moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow across the clearing where an old fire pit waited, ringed with stones darkened by time. You paused at its edge. Fingers brushing the worn bark of a nearby log, before settling down and wrapping your coat tighter around your shoulders. A gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of smoke, memory, and something just out of reach, familiar but long forgotten. In that moment, the silence spoke to you more deeply than words ever could, and you knew the story was just beginning to unfold. As your breath slowed and your thoughts began to settle, the wind seemed to circle around you like an old friend returning from a long journey. You watched the fire flicker, casting golden light onto the snow-covered ground, and felt something deep inside begin to loosen and drift free. The snow whispered beneath your boots as you stepped carefully through the forest, each breath drawing in the cold, pine-scented air. Above, the moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow across the clearing where an old fire pit waited, ringed with stones darkened by time. You paused at its edge, fingers brushing the worn bark of a nearby log, before settling down and wrapping your coat tighter around your shoulders. A gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of smoke, memory, and something just out of reach, familiar but long forgotten. In that moment, the silence spoke to you more deeply than words ever could, and you knew the story was just beginning to unfold. As your breath slowed and your thoughts began to settle, the wind seemed to circle around you like an old friend returning from a long journey. You watched the fire flicker, casting golden light onto the snow-covered ground, and felt something deep inside. Begin to loosen and drift free. The snow whispered beneath your boots as you stepped carefully through the forest, each breath drawing in the cold, pine-scented air. Above, the moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow across the clearing where an old fire pit waited, ringed with stones darkened by time. You paused at its edge, fingers brushing the worn bark of a nearby log, before settling down and wrapping your coat tighter around your shoulders. A gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of smoke, memory, and something just out of reach, familiar but long forgotten. In that moment, the silence spoke to you more deeply than words ever could, and you knew the story was just beginning to unfold. As your breath slowed and your thoughts began to settle, the wind seemed to circle around you, like an old friend returning from a long journey. You watched the fire flicker, casting golden light onto the snow-covered ground, and felt something deep inside begin to loosen and drift free. The snow whispered beneath your boots as you stepped carefully through the forest, each breath drawing in the cold pine-scented air. Above, the moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow across the clearing where an old fire pit waited, ringed with stones darkened by time. You paused at its edge, fingers brushing the worn bark of a nearby log, before settling down and wrapping your coat tighter around your shoulders. A gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of smoke, memory, and something just out of reach, familiar but long forgotten. In that moment, the silence spoke to you more deeply than words ever could, and you knew the story was just beginning to unfold. As your breath slowed and your thoughts began to settle, the wind seemed to circle around you like an old friend returning from a long journey. You watched the fire flicker, casting golden light onto the snow-covered ground, and felt something deep inside begin to loosen and drift free. The snow whispered beneath your boots as you stepped carefully through the forest, each breath drawing in the cold, pine-scented air. Above, the moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow across the clearing where an old fire pit waited, ringed with stones darkened by time. You paused at its edge, fingers brushing the worn bark of a nearby log, before settling down and wrapping your coat tighter around your shoulders. A gentle wind stirred, carrying the scent of smoke, memory, and something just out of reach, familiar but long forgotten. In that moment, the silence spoke to you more deeply than words ever could, and you knew the story was just beginning to unfold. As your breath slowed and your thoughts began to settle, the wind seemed to circle around you like an old friend returning from a long journey. You watched the fire flicker, casting golden light onto the snow-covered ground, and felt something deep inside begin to loosen and drift free. The snow whispered beneath your boots as you stepped carefully through the forest, each breath drawing in the cold, pine-scented air. Above, the moon hung low and heavy, casting a pale glow across the clearing where an old fire pit waited, ringed with stones darkened by time. The figure across the fire leaned closer, eyes steady. Most who come here are carrying something, not in their hands, but in the quiet places. They reached into a worn satchel and withdrew a small bottle sealed with dark wax. Inside, a swirl of silvery mist curled and shimmered. This one, they said softly, held a forgotten goodbye. Someone once whispered it into the wind, but never said it aloud. You watched it glow faintly, as if aware of your attention. Some winds are memories waiting for the right moment, they added. Others are truths we haven't found words for yet. They passed the bottle to you. It felt cool and smooth in your palm, the mist inside turning gently. You don't have to open it, they said. It's not about what's inside. It's about knowing it was never lost. You held it there in the firelight, unsure what stirred more, the mist within, or something quieter in your chest. The forest beyond the clearing was still, listening. The snow no longer felt cold, just present. The keeper teaches us, they continued, that winds don't disappear, they wait, until we're ready to feel them without fear. You turned the bottle slowly in your hands, watching the mist drift and coil like breath caught in glass. Where did the bottles go? You asked. The figure smiled, eyes flickering with firelight. Some stay with the keeper, others find their way back to the people who need them. You'd be surprised how often something forgotten comes home on the wind. They picked up another from the satchel, this one etched with tiny stars. This one was a dream that someone let go too soon. She never knew it waited for her, curled beneath her windowsill for years. The fire cracked softly as they set the second bottle down. The keeper doesn't label them, she listens. Each one hums with its own kind of silence. Some are sharp, others soft, but all of them want to be heard. You looked at the one in your hand again. It had grown warmer, as if recognizing you. "Why me?" you asked. The figure shrugged gently. "Because the wind remembers you. It always has." You didn't reply, but something inside you eased, just a little, like a knot loosening, like a door that had been closed beginning to open. The figure stirred the fire with a stick, sending a burst of sparks into the air. "There's a story," they said, "of a boy who followed the wind north for 3 winters. He wasn't looking for answers, just a place where he could rest without pretending." You leaned in slightly, drawn to the rhythm of their voice. He found the keeper's cottage by accident, though really no one ever does. The door was open. Inside, the walls were covered in shelves. No furniture, just hundreds of bottles glowing faintly like stars waiting for nightfall. You listened still. The keeper didn't speak, the figure said. She only gestured for the boy to sit. She handed him a bottle with a crack in the wax, just wide enough for the wind to whisper through. The flames shifted, casting long shadows across the snow. When he held it, he remembered the sound of his father's laugh. Not loud or recent, but enough. You watched the fire carefully now, as if your own memories might flicker out between the sparks. "That was the first time he cried," the figure added, "and the first time it didn't hurt to do so." You could feel the silence in your chest now, not empty, but full of things you'd never said aloud. The bottle in your hand pulsed gently with warmth. "What happens to them?" you asked. "The winds, once they're felt." The figure paused, staring into the trees. "They return, lighter, changed, like stories passed from one soul to another." The fire's glow softened as the wind stirred the branches above. "Nothing ever really leaves," they said. "The wind just carries it far enough so we can see it clearly, without turning away." Snow began to fall again, soft and quiet. The figure stood, stretching slowly. "There's another fire," they said. "Half a day's walk from here. Someone else will need this story next." You looked up, startled. "You're leaving?" They smiled gently. "Not away, just forward. The wind doesn't stop, and neither do we." They placed another log onto the fire, steadying the flames. "Keep the bottle, or bury it beneath the pine roots. Either way, it'll know what to do." You nodded, not ready but no longer resisting. They turned toward the path, lantern glowing pale blue in their hand. "The keeper once told me," they said, "that every person carries a wind only they can name. When we speak it, even in silence, it begins to change us." You held the bottle closer. The mist inside no longer shifted. It waited. "Trust that what you've carried has meaning," they added, "even if you don't yet know its shape." Then they disappeared into the trees, the wind following like a soft ribbon, wrapping the forest in a hush made of leaving and remembering. You sat alone now, the fire steady beside you. The bottle rested in your lap, no longer unfamiliar. You studied its shape, the way the glass caught the light, the way your reflection curved around its surface. The wind had calmed, but its presence remained, woven into the branches, the snow, the silence. You didn't open the bottle. You didn't need to. Some truths aren't about knowing. They're about keeping. You leaned back against the log and closed your eyes. The warmth of the fire on your face and the quiet deep in your bones. Night deepened around you, wrapping the clearing in its velvet hush. The fire crackled low, its flames dancing slower now, like it too had begun to listen. Somewhere in the distance an owl called once, then fell silent. The bottle in your lap pulsed gently, no longer with urgency but with rhythm, like a heartbeat reminding you that you were still here, still whole. You opened your eyes and stared into the trees. They no longer felt like walls, they felt like guardians, and you, no longer a guest. Something had shifted. Something had made room. You stood slowly, tucking the bottle into your coat. The snow beneath your boots made no sound, just a soft sinking with each step. You didn't know where you were going, but you trusted your feet to carry you. The forest had changed, or maybe it was you who had. The branches seemed to lean inward, not closing in, but guiding. Like old hands resting gently on your shoulders, the wind, now faint and melodic, stirred the pine needles above. It didn't speak, but you understood it all the same. It was saying, "Keep going, you're not lost." The path curved toward a frozen creek, its surface shining like silver glass under the moonlight. You knelt beside it, brushing snow from a fallen log. For a long time, you said nothing, just listened, to the slow crack of ice shifting beneath, to the soft rhythm of your own breath. Then, you reached into your coat and held the bottle up to the light. It didn't glow. It didn't need to. The stillness inside it was enough. You set it gently on the frozen log, not to forget it, but to honor it. A part of your story left where it could be heard. As you stepped back, the wind picked up, circling the bottle like a ribbon unspooling. Not wild, not sudden, just sure. You watched as it lifted just an inch, then settled again. The wax seal remained unbroken, but something invisible had been released. You felt it move through your chest, a letting go so quiet it barely registered, except in the lightness of your limbs, the quiet in your ribs. You didn't cry. You didn't smile. You simply breathed, for what felt like the first time in years, without holding anything back. You walked away from the creek slowly, the bottle still resting on the log behind you, glowing just slightly under the moon. You didn't look back, not out of dismissal, but because you no longer needed to. The story had done its work, not erased anything, but softened it. The trees opened wider, the trail a little clearer now. You didn't know how far the keeper's cottage was. Maybe you'd already passed it. Maybe it lived in every place the wind had stopped and listened. You smiled gently, and this time it stayed. You walked until the trees gave way to an open field blanketed in moonlight. The snow here was untouched, a canvas of pale blue shadows. You stood at the edge, listening. The silence wasn't empty. It pulsed, alive, as if the land remembered your steps before you took them. In the centre of the field stood a single tree, gnarled and bare, but glowing faintly at the roots. You approached slowly. Hanging from its lowest branch was a bottle, clear, untouched by frost, the mist inside swirling as if waiting. It looked nothing like yours, and yet it felt the same. You reached up and touched the glass. It was warm, not like fire, but like a hand that had been waiting to hold yours. The mist inside flickered, then settled. A memory pressed against your chest, not your own, but deeply familiar. A child humming beneath a quilt. The sound of two people laughing in a kitchen. A storm outside and nowhere to be but home. You stepped back, unsure if you had seen or remembered it, but the feeling lingered. That's what the Keeper's winds did. They reminded you of what you didn't know you missed. You left the bottle hanging there, undisturbed. Some winds were not meant to be taken, just witnessed, honoured. The tree behind you stood taller somehow, as if your acknowledgement had returned something it long held alone. The wind picked up again, carrying no cold, only the scent of pine, cinnamon, and ash. You pulled your coat tighter, not from chill, but comfort. The kind of warmth that lingers after you've heard a story that was never yours but still changed you. And with that, you kept walking. The trail led to a small rise. At the top, you turned and looked back over the field, the bottle still catching the light. It looked like a star fallen to earth. Below, the forest stretched endlessly, but you were no longer afraid of its size. The Keeper's work wasn't about distance, it was about presence. You realized you hadn't thought of time in hours, maybe days. It didn't matter. Some journeys aren't measured by how far you've come, but by how much you're willing to feel. And you had felt more in this stillness than you ever expected. At the base of the rise, a worn path reappeared, edged with smooth stones and old footprints nearly erased by snow. You followed it, not because it promised answers, but because it felt right beneath your boots. The wind moved with you, steady now, like a companion instead of a guide. Trees whispered overhead, not with voices, but with presence. You weren't seeking anything anymore. You were simply continuing. And in the rhythm of your steps, the quiet of the forest, and the bottle left behind, you found what you didn't know you were looking for. The trail curved toward a grove of fir trees, their branches heavy with snow. Beneath them, the world hushed again. No birds, no breeze, just the sound of your own breath. In the centre of the grove stood a stone bench, half buried in frost, as if someone had once waited there and never left. You sat, more from instinct than exhaustion. Above, the sky had begun to shift, clouds parting to reveal stars, faint, patient, eternal. You watched them in silence. They didn't guide you. They didn't need to. They simply reminded you that you were not alone beneath them. Something rustled behind you. You didn't startle. You just listened. A soft crunch of footsteps in the snow, and then a voice, quiet but certain. You left it. You turned to see the figure again, the same one from the fire. lantern in hand, expression unreadable. "I did," you said, not sure how they'd followed you or how time worked here at all. They nodded. "Good. That means you're ready for the next one." From beneath their coat they drew a second bottle. This one was darker, nearly opaque. "It's not yours," they did, "but it's waiting for you." You didn't take it right away. There was weight to it. Not the bottle itself, but what it carried. You could feel it before you even reached for it, like a thought someone had buried deep here long before you ever walked these woods. "Then why me?" you asked. The figure placed it gently on the bench beside you, because some winds can't return until someone is willing to hold them, even briefly. The lantern glowed softly in their hand, casting a ring of gold around your feet. You don't have to keep it. You just have to listen. You stared at the bottle. It didn't shimmer like the first. It was still, heavy. Inside, no mist swirled, only a faint shadow, like something once bright now resting. You picked it up, slowly. The cold of the glass travelled up your arm, not painful, just real, like memory. You held it to your ear without thinking. There was no sound, but somehow you knew what it held. A promise someone never got to keep. You weren't sure whose. Maybe that didn't matter. The wind didn't belong to one person. It moved through all of us, looking for quiet places to land. The figure sat beside you, quiet. No story followed, just a presence. Sometimes companionship doesn't need words. You set the bottle down between you, hands folded in your lap. "What happens if no one ever hears it?" you asked. The figure tilted their head. "Then it waits, as long as it takes." You look down at the bottle again, and if it's never meant to be heard, they smile gently. Then it simply becomes part of the wind, changed, softer, carried into other lives in ways we'll never fully understand. That made sense. You let it settle in. The wind returned, curling through the grove like a slow breath. It moved around the bottle, not disturbing it, just acknowledging it. You and the figure sat quietly, letting it pass. "You can leave it here," they said, "or take it to the edge of the field. Some bottles know when they're ready to dissolve." You didn't answer. You didn't need to. You stood, brushing snow from your coat, and picked up the bottle with both hands. It felt lighter now, not because it had changed, but because you had. The weight wasn't gone, it was understood. You walked across the clearing, the figure behind you, their lantern throwing shadows that stretched far and thin. At the edge of the grove stood a circle of stones worn smooth by time and weather. You knelt and placed the bottle in the centre. The moment your fingers left the glass, the wind stirred again, slow and deliberate. Snowflakes rose around the stones, caught in a spiral that shimmered in the moonlight. Then softly the bottle cracked, not shattered, just opened. The shadow inside lifted, turned to mist, and vanished into the sky. You didn't speak. Neither did the figure. Some moments are too whole for words. You stood there for a while, watching the last of the mist drift between the trees. It didn't feel like something had ended. It felt like something had returned to its source. What was it? You asked eventually. The figure paused. Regret, but not yours. You nodded. That felt true. You turned away from the stones and the wind followed, not tugging, not leading, just walking with you, as if it had made space for you to become part of it. The lantern dimmed as you walked, not from lack of flame but from distance. The figure stopped at the edge of the trees. You'll find the keeper's door soon, they said. But remember, she doesn't speak unless the wind asks her to. You gave a small smile. How will I know what to say? They tapped your chest, right over your ribs. You already did. Then they turned and vanished into the dark, leaving only the hush of snowfall and your own breath. You walked on, bottleless now, but somehow more full than before. At last the forest parted again, and ahead stood a small cottage crooked with age, its chimney releasing the faintest thread of smoke. Light glowed from its windows, not bright, but warm, like someone had been waiting a long time without rushing. You stepped onto the porch, boots creaking on old wood. The door didn't open. It didn't need to. The moment you placed your hand on the handle, something inside you quieted. Not because the journey had ended, but because the silence ahead was one you were finally ready to enter. The door opened with a soft groan, as though it hadn't been touched in seasons. Inside, the air was cool and still. The room smelled of wood smoke, dried herbs, and something older, like paper left out in the rain and dried again in the sun. Shelves lined the walls, filled with bottles of every shape and size. Some clear, some dark, some softly glowing. You stepped inside, breath held, and the door closed gently behind you. No one appeared, but you felt her, the keeper, not in sight, but in presence, like a melody that arrives before the voice that sings it. You moved carefully through the room, each bottle humming faintly as you passed. They didn't speak, but each held a story you could almost remember. One glowed blue and cold, like a winter evening that never ended. Another flickered like candlelight on the edge of sleep. You reached toward one shaped like a tear and stopped. It pulsed. Not for you. Not yet. You understood, stepping back. These weren't things to be taken. They were to be met, and only when the wind inside them was ready to be heard. At the far end of the cottage sat a chair beside a hearth, where coals glowed without flame. You stood there a moment, unsure whether to wait or speak. Then, behind you, the softest footstep. You turned. The keeper stood in the doorway, tall, wrapped in wool, her hair like wind-woven thread. Her face was unreadable, not distant, but vast. Like the sky before a storm. She didn't speak, just nodded once, her gaze resting on your chest, as if she could see everything you'd ever carried and everything you'd let go. She crossed the room and picked up a bottle from a high shelf. Tall, amber glass sealed with copper wax. She held it in both hands, then placed it on the table between you. You didn't ask what it was. You already knew. It wasn't pain. It wasn't joy. It was something in between. Something tender. Something unfinished. She stepped back, giving you space. The bottle made no sound, but your heartbeat echoed in your ears. You reached out, fingers steady, and touched the glass. Warm. Familiar. Like a doorway you'd never opened but had always stood beside. You didn't break the seal. You didn't need to. The moment your hand rested there, the wind moved through the cottage, gentle, sure, surrounding both you and the keeper. It rustled the bottles, lifted the scent of pine and ash, stirred the coals into soft red bloom. The keeper closed her eyes, not in rest, but in recognition, as if she too had carried this one. And now, someone else was ready. The bottle remained closed, but its weight shifted, as though the silence inside had changed shape. It no longer needed to be held, only remembered. The keeper moved quietly through the room, returning the amber bottle to its shelf. You remained seated, hands resting on your knees, eyes tracing the flickering shadows on the wall. "What now?" you whispered, not really expecting an answer. But the wind, ever faithful, shifted softly near your ear, not with words, but with a feeling, completion, not an ending, but a turning. The keeper knelt beside the hearth and placed a fresh log on the coals. Flames rose, gentle and gold. The warmth reached your skin slowly, like memory returning after a long sleep. The keeper sat across from you, her presence steady but quiet, like a tree that had grown through centuries of weather. She poured tea into 2 handmade cups, steam curling into the dim air. You took one, nodding your thanks, and drank. It tasted of something ancient and grounding, earth, pine, and a sweetness that reminded you of childhood. No words passed between you, but none were needed. In her gaze you felt the stories of others, countless souls who had come before, each one carrying something they didn't know how to let go until the wind helped them remember. You placed your empty cup on the table and looked again at the walls, at the bottles watching quietly from their shelves. Some pulsed faintly, others seemed dormant. All were waiting. "Will I forget all of this?" you asked softly. The keeper shook her head once. "Not forget," she said, her voice low and wind-worn, "but it will become part of you, so deeply woven that you'll no longer feel the weight, just the thread." You exhaled. That was enough. The kind of answer that didn't solve but softened. You rose and stepped toward the door. The wind met you there, circling your ankles, lifting the edge of your coat like a quiet goodbye. The keeper followed but didn't speak. She stood in the doorway as you descended the steps, her figure framed by firelight. "You are not who you were when you arrived," she said, "not because you changed, but because you listened." You met her eyes one last time, then turned toward the forest. The trees awaited, not as barriers, but as witnesses. You walked slowly, and the wind walked with you. The snow had deepened, but your steps felt lighter, not because the journey had ended, but because you no longer resisted the path. Each tree you passed felt like a page in a story you had once forgotten how to read. And now, the lines were beginning to return. Not clearly, not quickly, but enough. Behind you, the cottage faded into shadow. Ahead, a new hush opened, wide and unhurried. The wind curled around your shoulders like a shawl. It didn't lead, it simply stayed. And for the first time in a long time, so did you. You reached a clearing you hadn't seen before. It wasn't marked on any path, yet it felt like a place you'd always known. The snow here was undisturbed, except for a circle of stones in the centre, half buried and covered in frost. You stepped inside, breath slowing. The air shifted, brighter, thinner, like dawn pressing at the edges of night. You removed your gloves and touched one of the stones. Warmth met your skin, not heat, but recognition. A place where many had stood before you, where many had left something behind and walked on, lighter. You sat within the circle and closed your eyes. No instructions, no voice, just wind. It moved around you in slow spirals, carrying scents of smoke, moss, and something almost floral, like memory in bloom. Images drifted in, hands you hadn't held in years, words unsaid, laughter in rooms that no longer stood. They didn't ache, they simply arrived and passed. You understood then. The keeper didn't take pain away. She taught you how to carry it without it closing your chest, to keep it open like a door, always ready to let go or welcome something new. When you opened your eyes, a faint glimmer caught your attention. In the centre of the stone circle, half buried in snow, was a bottle. It hadn't been there before. You reached for it slowly. It was small, smooth, sealed in clear wax with no markings. Inside, no swirling mist, no shadow, only a single point of light, steady as a heartbeat. You held it close, not to open it, but to listen. It made no sound, but something in your chest answered. A whisper of a feeling you hadn't named in years. Peace, not loud, but true. You tucked the bottle inside your coat, not to keep but to carry forward. You stood, brushing snow from your shoulders, and looked at the forest edge. The wind had shifted again, not guiding, but travelling beside you. You stepped from the circle, leaving the stones undisturbed. No trace marked your presence, and none was needed. The stories that mattered had already settled into the earth. You walked forward, not toward anything, but through it, through memory, through wind, through the parts of yourself you'd finally allowed to be heard. The sky began to brighten in the east, not yet morning, but no longer night. The in-between. You paused to watch it, hand resting over the place where the bottle lay tucked against your chest. In that light, you felt whole, not fixed or solved, but whole in your becoming. The keeper was far behind now, but not gone. You would hear her again, in wind through leaves, in fire crackles, in the hush before sleep. You walked on, not with urgency, but with quiet conviction, the kind that lives in those who've truly listened. You followed the lightening sky through narrow pines, your path softened by snow and the echo of your own calm. The forest no longer felt like something to pass through. It felt like something you were a part of. Each branch above carried traces of wind and story. Somewhere behind you, the bottle you left, the keeper, the fire, all remained, not as weight, but as a part of your spine now. You didn't need to look back. The wind didn't either. It brushed your shoulder gently, then fell still. It had done what it came to do. So had you. Eventually you came upon a frozen stream, its surface glistening like quiet glass. You sat on a fallen log nearby and watched frost bloom across the bark. The world was perfectly still, and for once, so were you. No questions rose, no thoughts tugged, just breath, just presence. You placed your hand on your chest, feeling the bottle still nestled there. The light inside remained steady, not urgent, not fading, just there, a quiet anchor. And in that moment, you realized you were not waiting for anything. You had already arrived. The wind returned one last time, lifting the edges of your coat, brushing your cheek like a farewell. You closed your eyes and let it pass. No part of you feared its going. The keeper had taught you that winds always return, but never quite the same. You stood, stretched, and took one last look at the snow-covered trail. This chapter had folded itself closed, not with an ending, but with breath. And as you walked again, this time toward a world waiting beyond the woods, you carried nothing heavy. Only air, only light, only story. Hours passed, or maybe none at all. You emerged at the edge of a hill overlooking a wide valley. Villages below slept beneath roofs of snow. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys. Life was waiting, not the same as before, but real. You stood at the ridge, hand brushing the bottle through your coat, and for a brief moment you almost turned back. Not from doubt, but from gratitude. Then, without fanfare, you stepped forward, and somewhere far behind you, a window in the keeper's cottage flickered warm, then dimmed. That night, as you slept beneath familiar blankets, the wind moved through your dreams, not to stir them, but to rest alongside them. In one, you stood by the fire again. In another, the bottle floated across a silver stream. None of it asked to be understood. It simply stayed. And when morning came, you woke not with urgency, but with steadiness. You rose, opened the window, and let the wind inside. It didn't speak, but it didn't need to. It had kept your story, and now it knew you would carry the next one.